Every night at exactly 11:47 p.m., the most dangerous man in South Korea falls apart. Rain or snow, summer heat or winter frost, it doesn't matter. Park Seo-joon, the ruthless king of Seoul's criminal empire, walks through the iron gates of Hanyang Memorial Cemetery with a single white rose clutched in his blood-stained hands. The same hands that have signed death warrants. The same hands that have built a billion-dollar dynasty on fear and violence. Those hands tremble like a frightened child's the moment he kneels before her grave. Tonight is no different. His Armani suit soaks through as he presses his forehead against the cold marble, his bodyguards standing 50 feet back because he has ordered them never to witness this. Never to see the tears that carve rivers down his hardened face. Never to hear the words he whispers to the woman beneath the earth. "I'm sorry, Yuna. I'm so sorry." His voice cracks. Shatters. Breaks into 1,000 jagged pieces that scatter across the silent graveyard like shrapnel. For 312 nights, he has made this pilgrimage. For 312 nights, he has begged forgiveness from a woman who cannot hear him. For 312 nights, he has told her about his day, about the empire she left behind, about the unbearable weight of breathing without her. But here is what Park Seo-joon doesn't know. 30 feet behind him, hidden in the twisted shadows of an ancient oak tree, a woman watches. Her hand is pressed so hard against her mouth that her teeth have drawn blood from her own lip. Her body shakes with silent sobs that she cannot release. Her heart, the one the doctors declared stopped beating almost a year ago, is pounding so violently she fears he might hear it. Because Yuna Park is not dead. She is standing right there, close enough to smell his cologne on the midnight breeze, close enough to see the gray hairs that have appeared at his temples since her funeral, close enough to run into his arms and end this torture for both of them. But she cannot move. She cannot speak. She cannot reveal herself. Because the people who tried to kill her are still breathing. They are standing in his inner circle. They are eating at his table. They are waiting for the perfect moment to put her husband in the ground right next to the empty coffin that bears her name. And tonight, as Seo-joon weeps over her grave for the 312th time, Yuna makes a decision that will burn Seoul to ashes. She will not just survive. She will make them wish they had buried her deeper. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we must travel back 313 days. Back to a morning when the sun was golden and the world still made sense. Back to the last day Yuna Park was allowed to be happy. She woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of Seo-joon's arm draped across her waist. Even in sleep, he held her like she might disappear. It was a habit born from the early years of their marriage when every day brought a new threat, a new enemy, a new reason to fear that their love story would end in blood. But those days were supposed to be behind them. Seo-joon had spent the last 5 years consolidating power, eliminating rivals, building an empire so vast and so fortified that no one dared challenge him. He had done terrible things to create this peace. Things that haunted his dreams and carved lines into his face. But he had done them for her. Every brutal decision, every cold execution, every ruthless negotiation was a brick in the wall he built around their happiness. Yuna knew what her husband was. She had known since the night they met at a charity gala in Gangnam, when she watched him smile politely at a senator while his men dragged a traitor out the back door. She should have run. Any sensible woman would have run. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at her. A hunger that had nothing to do with power. A loneliness that matched her own. She was an orphan. A nobody. A girl who had clawed her way out of poverty through scholarships and determination, building a small but successful architecture firm through sheer willpower. She had no family, no connections, no safety net. And maybe that was why she understood him. They were both survivors. Both alone in a world that wanted to crush them. Their courtship was unconventional, to say the least. He would send her blueprints of buildings he wanted her to design, legitimate projects that gave her firm credibility and her bank account stability. She would send him sketches of homes she dreamed of living in someday, places with gardens and sunlight and rooms for children. Slowly, without either of them realizing it, they began to design a future together. If you are enjoying this story, do me a small favor and subscribe to this channel. Also, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I love reading every single comment, and it helps me create more stories like this one. Now, let us continue. The wedding was a secret affair. Only 12 people attended, and half of them were armed guards. Yuna wore a simple white dress she had designed herself, and Seo-jun wore a smile that his men had never seen before. They exchanged vows in a temple hidden in the mountains, promising to love each other until death and beyond. At the time, neither of them imagined how soon that promise would be tested. The first 3 years of marriage were a delicate dance. Yuna insisted on maintaining her career, refusing to become a trophy wife locked in a golden cage. Seo-jun struggled with this, his protective instincts warring with his respect for her independence. They fought about it often, loud explosive arguments that ended in passionate reconciliations. But through it all, the love only deepened. She softened his edges. He strengthened her resolve. Together, they were becoming something neither had been alone. Complete. But there were those who watched this transformation with growing concern. Kwon Min-jae had been Seo-jun's right hand for 15 years. They had risen through the ranks together, spilling blood side by side, building the syndicate from a small street gang into a multinational organization. Min-jae was the shadow to Seo-jun's flame, the whisper to his roar. He handled the dirty work that even the boss could not stomach. And for 15 years, he had done so without question. Until Yuna. Min-jae saw her influence spreading through the organization like a slow poison. Seo-jun was talking about legitimate businesses now. Real estate. Technology. Legal investments that would eventually allow them to exit the criminal world entirely. He spoke of children, of legacy, of a future where their name meant something other than fear. To Min-jae, this was not evolution. It was extinction. He had sacrificed everything for this empire. His youth. His conscience. His chance at a normal life. And now, because of some woman, Seo-jun wanted to throw it all away? To become soft? To become weak? To become the very thing their enemies would devour? No. Min-jae would not allow it. He found an ally in Soo-ah, the syndicate's chief accountant. She was brilliant and ruthless, a woman who had risen through the male-dominated organization by being twice as smart and 3 times as cold as anyone around her. She had harbored feelings for Seo-jun for years, feelings that curdled into bitter hatred when he married someone else. Someone ordinary. Someone who did not understand the weight of the crown. Together, Min-jae and Soo-ah began to plot. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would make Yuna's death look natural. A sudden illness. A tragic accident. Something that would break Seo-jun's heart but not arouse suspicion. Once he was drowning in grief, Min-jae would step in as the supportive friend, guiding decisions, taking on responsibilities. Slowly, imperceptibly, the power would shift. And when the time was right, Seo-jun would suffer an accident of his own. The poison they chose was a synthetic compound that mimicked the symptoms of a brain hemorrhage. Undetectable in a standard autopsy. Fast-acting. Painless, they told themselves, as if that absolved them of murder. On the morning of day 1, Yuna drank her usual tea. Chamomile with honey, prepared by the kitchen staff who had been bribed to look the other way. Within an hour, she felt dizzy. Within 2 hours, she collapsed in the hallway. Within 3 hours, she was pronounced dead at Seoul Central Hospital. Seo-jun was in a meeting when he received the call. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen expecting a routine update. Instead, he saw a message from his head of security. 4 words that stopped his heart. Come to the hospital. Now. He does not remember the drive. He does not remember pushing through the emergency room doors, shoving aside nurses who tried to slow him down. He does not remember falling to his knees beside the gurney where his wife lay motionless, her skin already losing its warmth. What he remembers is the silence. The terrible, absolute silence that filled his head when the doctor told him she was gone. An aneurysm, they said. Sudden and catastrophic. Nothing could have been done. She did not suffer. But Seo Jun suffered. In that moment, something inside him broke so completely that he would never be whole again. He gathered her body in his arms and screamed. Not words. Just sound. Pure anguish ripping from his throat until the nurses sedated him. The funeral was held 3 days later. The entire criminal underworld attended, paying respects to the queen of the Park dynasty. Min-jae stood at Seo-jun's side, his face a mask of grief, his hand steady on his boss's shoulder. Soo-ah dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief, performing sorrow for the cameras. They watched Seo-jun throw the first handful of dirt onto the coffin. They watched him sink to his knees in the mud, unable to stand. They watched, and they smiled behind their masks, because everything was going according to plan. But plans, like people, can be betrayed. What Min-jae and Soo-ah did not know was that the coroner assigned to Yuna's case owed her a debt. 3 years earlier, Yuna had anonymously paid for his daughter's cancer treatment when his insurance refused coverage. She had never asked for anything in return. She had never even told him it was her. He discovered the truth months later through a grateful nurse, and he had sworn to himself that someday, somehow, he would repay the kindness. When Yuna's body arrived at his morgue, the coroner recognized her immediately. And something about the case felt wrong. The speed of the death. The insistence from hospital administrators that no extensive tests were needed. The way certain powerful people seemed eager for the cremation to happen quickly. He ran his own tests, off the books, in the dead of night. What he found made his blood run cold. The poison was still traceable in her tissue, but only for another few hours. After that, it would metabolize completely, leaving no evidence. He had a choice. File the report and let a murderer walk free. Or do something unthinkable. He chose the unthinkable. Using a combination of adrenaline and experimental compounds, he attempted to reverse the poison's effects. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. A desperate gamble that went against every protocol he had sworn to uphold. But it worked. At 3:47 a.m., in the cold silence of the morgue, Yuna Park's heart began to beat again. She woke up gasping, disoriented, her body screaming with pain. The coroner held her down, whispering urgently, explaining what had happened, what he had discovered, why she could not reveal herself yet. At first, she did not believe him. How could Min-jae, who had stood at their wedding, who had sworn loyalty to Seo Jun 1,000 times, be capable of this? But then she remembered. She remembered the strange taste in her tea that morning. She remembered seeing Soo-ah in the kitchen when she should have been at the office. She remembered the odd look Min-jae gave her the night before, almost sad, almost apologetic. And she remembered the paralysis. Before the darkness took her completely, there had been a window of consciousness. A terrifying interval where her body was frozen but her mind was awake. She had heard voices. She had heard laughter. She had heard Min-jae telling someone on the phone that Phase 1 was complete. The rage that ignited in her chest was unlike anything she had ever felt. It burned away the fear, the confusion, the grief for her old life. In its place grew something cold and sharp. The coroner smuggled her out in a body bag, switching her with an unclaimed corpse of similar build. He set her up in a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a place no one would think to look. He provided medical supplies, fake identification, and a single warning. Trust no one. They have eyes everywhere. And so Yuna Park became a ghost. For the first few weeks, she focused on healing. The poison had weakened her body, and the resurrection had been traumatic. She spent her days regaining strength and her nights planning. She hacked into the syndicate's communications using skills she had picked up from Seojin's tech team, who had never suspected that the boss's wife was listening and learning. What she discovered made her sick. Min-jae and Suah were not just trying to take over the syndicate. They were systematically dismantling everything Seo-jun had built. They were selling information to rivals. They were embezzling funds into offshore accounts. They were positioning themselves as the saviors who would rescue the organization from a grief-stricken, incompetent leader. And Seo-jun had no idea. He was too deep in his sorrow to see the knives at his back. Yuna watched him through hacked security cameras, through surveillance drones she controlled from her laptop, through the eyes of loyal servants she had secretly contacted. She watched him stop eating. She watched him stop sleeping. She watched him visit her grave every single night, talking to the earth as if she could hear him. It destroyed her. Every instinct screamed at her to reveal herself, to run to him, to end his suffering. But she knew that the moment she showed her face, they would both be dead. Min-jae had too many resources, too many loyal soldiers, too much control. She needed to dismantle his power structure first. She needed to turn his allies against him. She needed to become the weapon Seo-jun did not know he needed. And so she began her campaign. It started small. Documents that went missing. Shipments that were intercepted. Rumors that spread through the underground about a mole in the organization. Min-jae blamed rivals. Suah blamed incompetence. But the problems kept mounting, and the suspicion kept growing. Then Yuna escalated. She started leaving gifts. Suah came home one evening to find her bathroom mirror shattered. In the center of the sink sat a teacup filled with chamomile tea. The same blend she had poisoned. There was no note. There did not need to be. Suah did not sleep for 3 days. Min-jae found a funeral wreath delivered to his private office. The card read simply, "See you soon." His hands shook as he burned it, ordering his security doubled, then tripled. But no amount of guards could protect him from a ghost. The psychological warfare was effective, but it was not enough. Yuna needed evidence. Concrete, undeniable proof that would expose the conspiracy and destroy any credibility Min-jae and Suah had left. She found it in the most unlikely place. Suah, for all her intelligence, had one weakness. Vanity. She kept a private journal, a digital diary encrypted on her personal laptop, where she documented her victories and vented her frustrations. In this journal, she had recorded everything. The planning of the murder. The bribing of the kitchen staff. The gleeful satisfaction of watching Seo-jun crumble. She wrote about it like a novelist describing her greatest plot twist. It took Yuna 2 months to crack the encryption. When she finally read the entries, she wept. Then she copied every single file. But she did not release them yet. The timing had to be perfect. Meanwhile, Seo-jun continued his nightly vigil at the grave. 312 nights of tears. 312 nights of whispered confessions. He told Yuna about the problems in the syndicate. He told her about the strange occurrences that were plaguing Min-jae and Suah. He told her that sometimes, late at night, he felt like she was still with him. If only he knew how right he was. On night 312, Yuna made her decision. She had gathered enough evidence. She had weakened Min-jae's position. She had planted seeds of doubt among the other crime bosses. It was time to come home. But first, she needed to give Seo-jun a sign. Something that would prepare him for the impossible truth. She waited until he left the cemetery, his shoulders hunched with grief, his bodyguards trailing behind. Then she approached the grave for the first time. She knelt in the same spot he had knelt, touching the cold marble that bore her name. On the gravestone, she placed a single item. A silver hair clip shaped like a crescent moon. It was the first gift he had ever given her, on their third date, when he had nervously told her that she reminded him of the moon. beautiful and distant, illuminating the darkness without even trying. She had worn it at their wedding. She had worn it every day of their marriage. And she had been wearing it the day she died. Seo Jun would know. He would understand that something was wrong. That something was impossible. And he would start to hope. The next evening, Seo Jun arrived at the grave at his usual time. His security chief noticed the boss pause, his body going rigid. They watched him bend down and pick something up from the marble surface. When he turned around, his face was pale as death. In his hand was the silver moon clip. His fingers closed around it so tightly that the metal bit into his palm, drawing blood. He did not feel the pain. He could not feel anything except the hurricane of confusion and terror and desperate, agonizing hope that was tearing through his chest. This clip had been buried with her. He had placed it in her hands himself, wrapping her cold fingers around it as a final goodbye. So how was it here? He spent the night tearing his house apart, searching for any sign of intrusion. His security team found nothing. The surveillance footage showed no one approaching the grave except Seo Jun himself. It was impossible. It was maddening. Unless. The thought was too big. Too terrifying. Too wonderful. He could not allow himself to think it. But the seed was planted, and it would grow. 3 nights later, Yuna made her next move. She sent him an email from an anonymous account. No subject line. No signature. Just a video file. Seo Jun opened it with trembling hands. The video showed a woman's silhouette standing in a darkened room. Her face was obscured, but her voice was unmistakable. A voice he had heard in his dreams every night for almost a year. "What do you trust more?" the voice asked. "The grave that holds my name, or the heart that still beats for you?" The video ended. Seo Jun did not move for 2 hours. When he finally stood, his face had transformed. The grief was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Something sharp and dangerous. The look of a predator who has just realized he has been hunting the wrong prey. He called an emergency meeting of his inner circle. Minjae and Sua arrived first, their expressions carefully neutral. They had heard about the boss's erratic behavior, his obsessive searching, his refusal to explain what was wrong. They assumed it was just another symptom of his breakdown. They were wrong. Seo Jun looked around the table at the faces of the people he had trusted with his life. His cousin, who managed the weapons trade. His childhood friend, who ran the gambling operations. Minjae, his right hand. Sua, his financial genius. One of them had killed his wife. Maybe more than one. He did not know who to trust anymore. But he knew that the truth was coming. He could feel it in his bones, in the prickling at the back of his neck, in the strange certainty that had settled over him since finding the hair clip. Yuna was not gone. She was coming back. And when she did, there would be a reckoning. The annual leadership summit was scheduled for the following week. All the major crime families would gather at Seojin's estate for a night of negotiations, alliances, and thinly veiled threats. It was the perfect stage for a resurrection. Yuna spent the days leading up to the summit putting the final pieces in place. She contacted the bosses she knew were loyal to Seo Jun, the ones who had privately expressed concerns about Minji's growing influence. She shared just enough evidence to make them suspicious, promising the full truth at the summit. She also reached out to one more person. Grandmother Park. Seojin's grandmother was 93 years old and had not left her mountain estate in a decade. But she was still the matriarch of the family, the woman who had raised Seo Jun after his parents were killed in a gang war, the woman whose blessing was required for any major decision. Yuna had always been terrified of her. The old woman was sharp as a blade and twice as cold. She had initially opposed the marriage, calling Yuna a distraction and a liability. It had taken years for Yuna to earn even a fraction of her respect. But now, Yuna needed her help. She traveled to the mountain estate in disguise, passing through checkpoints with her fake identification. When she finally stood before the ancient wooden doors of the main house, she hesitated. What if the grandmother turned her away? What if she called Min-jae? What if this was all a terrible mistake? The doors opened before she could knock. A servant led her through dim hallways to a room at the back of the house. And there, sitting in a high-backed chair like a queen on her throne, was Grandmother Park. The old woman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly when Yuna removed her disguise. So, the grandmother said, her voice like dry leaves rustling. The dead walk among us. Yuna bowed deeply. I need your help, grandmother. The old woman studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile cracked across her weathered face. I always knew you had steel in you, girl. Tell me everything. Yuna told her story. The poisoning. The resurrection. The conspiracy. The evidence. She held nothing back, laying her cards on the table for the woman who could either save her or destroy her. When she finished, the grandmother was silent for a long time. Min-jae, she finally said, the name dripping with contempt. I warned my grandson about that snake 20 years ago. But he valued loyalty over wisdom. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp despite their age. What do you need from me? Your presence at the summit. Your endorsement. And your protection, in case things go wrong. The grandmother laughed, a dry, crackling sound. Things will definitely go wrong, child. They always do. She reached out and took Yuna's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. But I will be there. And I will watch that snake choke on his own venom. The night of the summit arrived. Seojin's estate was transformed into a fortress of elegance and menace. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light over silk tablecloths. Armed guards stood at every entrance, dressed in formal suits that did little to conceal their weapons. The crime lords arrived in their finest clothes, their smiles hiding decades of rivalry and bloodshed. Seo-jun presided over the gathering like a ghost king. He had lost weight. His eyes were hollow. But there was something in his posture that made the other bosses uneasy. A coiled tension, like a spring about to snap. He struck again and again, reducing the lies to rubble, destroying the symbol of the worst year of his life. Yuna watched him with tears streaming down her face, not trying to stop him, understanding that he needed this. When he was finished, he dropped the hammer and fell to his knees, breathing hard. Yuna knelt beside him, taking his raw, bleeding hands in hers. It's over, she said softly. They can't hurt us anymore. He looked at the cherry tree, its branches reaching toward the sky. I want to build something here, he said. A monument. Not to death, but to life. To surviving. To us. She smiled, the first real smile in almost a year. Then we'll build it together. They sat in the shadow of the cherry tree as the sun climbed higher, talking about the future they had almost lost. They talked about leaving the criminal world, about the legitimate businesses they would build, about the children they might have someday. For the first time in 312 days, Park Seo-jun felt something he thought he would never feel again. Hope. And beside him, alive and warm and impossibly real, Yuna felt it too. They had walked through fire. They had survived betrayal. They had beaten death itself. Now, finally, they could begin to live. 6 months later, on a spring morning when the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, Yuna and Seo-jun renewed their wedding vows in the same mountain temple where they had first been married. This time, it was not a secret. The entire organization attended, along with Grandmother Park, who sat in the front row with tears glistening in her ancient eyes. The temple was filled with flowers and light and the sound of traditional music. When Seo-jun placed the ring on Yuna's finger, his voice was steady and clear. I vow to protect you, not by keeping you in a cage, but by standing beside you as an equal. I vow to trust you with my fears and my hopes. I vow to love you in life and in death and in whatever comes after. Yuna's vows were equally powerful. I vow to never hide from you again, even when hiding would be easier. I vow to fight for us with everything I have. I vow to be your partner, your weapon, your home. When they kissed, the applause was thunderous. That night, as they danced under lantern light, Seo-jun whispered in her ear. I still go to the cemetery sometimes. Yuna pulled back, surprised. Why? He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. To visit the cherry tree. To remember how close we came to losing everything. To remind myself never to take a single moment with you for granted. She kissed him softly. Then I'll come with you next time. And she did. Every year on the anniversary of her false death, they visited the cherry tree together. They would sit beneath its branches and talk about the year that had passed, the challenges they had faced, the joys they had experienced. They built their legitimate empire, piece by piece. Real estate. Technology. Philanthropy. Within 5 years, the park name was associated not with crime, but with innovation and generosity. They had 3 children. 2 boys and a girl, each with their mother's fierce intelligence and their father's protective instincts. And every night, no matter how busy or tired they were, Seo-jun held Yuna as they fell asleep. Because he remembered what it felt like to sleep alone. Because he remembered 312 nights of grief. Because he would never, ever take her presence for granted. Their story became legend in the underworld. A cautionary tale about the price of betrayal. A love story that transcended death. A reminder that some bonds cannot be broken, no matter how hard the world tries. And if you walk through Hanyang Memorial Cemetery today, you will find a cherry tree growing in a quiet corner. There is no gravestone. No marker of death. Just a small plaque at the base of the tree, engraved with 2 words. We survived. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Every subscriber helps me continue creating these emotional journeys for you. Thank you for watching until the end, and I will see you in the next story.